Once upon a time, there lived a little boy whose name was Pedro. He had no brothers or sisters, and he was very sad and lonely at home. Once, he brought home a lost cat, and sometimes later, a stray puppy. But his mother said animals brought dirt into the house, and so Pedro was soon alone again in his mother's clean, well-kept rooms. Then, one day, on his way to school, he caught sight of a fine red balloon. It was tied to a street lamp. Pedro laid down his backpack on the ground. He climbed up, untied the balloon, and ran off with it to the bus stop to catch the bus to take him to school. But the bus driver knew the rules. No dogs on the bus, no large packages, and no balloons on the bus. People with dogs walk. People with big packages take taxis. People with balloons leave them behind. Pedro did not want to leave his balloon behind. So the bus driver rang the bell, and the bus went on without him on it. Pedro's school was a long way off, and when he finally reached the school door, it was already shut. To be late for school because he walked with a balloon was unheard of. Pedro was very worried. Then he had an idea. He left his balloon with the custodian who was sweeping the yard. And since it was the first time he was ever late to school, he did not get in trouble. When school was over, the custodian who had kept the balloon in his room for Pedro all day gave it back to him. But it had begun to rain, and Pedro had to walk home because of those rules about balloons on buses. No balloons on the bus. But he thought his balloon shouldn't get wet. There was an old man just walking by, and Pedro asked him whether he and his balloon could get under the umbrella to get out of the rain. So from one umbrella to another, Pedro made his way home. His mother was happy to see him finally get home. But since she had been very worried, she got mad when she found out that it was a balloon that had made Pedro so late. She took his balloon, opened the window, and threw it out. Now, usually when you let a balloon go, it flies away. But Pedro's balloon stayed outside the window, and the two of them looked at each other through the glass. Pedro was surprised that his balloon hadn't flown away, but not really as surprised as all that. Friends will do all kinds of things for you. If a friend happens to be a balloon, it doesn't fly away. So Pedro opened his window quietly, took his balloon back inside, and hid it in his room. go to school, Pedro opened the window to let his balloon out, told it to come to him when he called. Then he picked up his backpack, kissed his mother goodbye, and went down the stairs. When he reached the street, he called, "Balloon! Balloon!" And the balloon came flying down to him. Then it began to follow Pedro without being led by the string, just as if it were a dog following its master. But like a dog, it didn't always do what it was told to do. When Pedro tried to catch it to cross the street, the balloon flew beyond his reach. Pedro decided to pretend he didn't care. He walked up the street just as if the balloon wasn't even there, and hid behind the corner of a house. The balloon got worried and scared and hurried up to catch him. When they got to the bus stop, Pedro said to the balloon, "Now, balloon, you follow me. Don't lose sight of the bus." That was how the strangest sight came to be seen. A balloon flying along behind a bus on a city street. When they reached Pedro's school, the balloon again tried not to let itself be caught. But the bell was already ringing, and the door was just about to close, so Pedro had to hurry into school alone. He was very worried. But the balloon flew over the school wall and got in line behind all the other children. The teacher was very surprised to see this strange new student. And when the balloon tried to follow them into the classroom, the children made such a noise that the principal came out to see what was going on. The principal tried to catch the balloon to put it out the door, but he couldn't. So he took Pedro by the hand and marched him out of school. The balloon left the classroom and followed them. The principal had urgent business to take care of at City Hall, and he didn't know what to do with Pedro and his red balloon. So he locked the boy in his office. The balloon, he said to himself, would have to stay outside the door. But that wasn't the balloon's idea at all. The balloon saw that the principal had put the key in his pocket. It sailed along behind him as the principal walked down the street. All the people knew the principal very well, and when they saw him walking past, followed by a balloon, they shook their heads and said, "The principal's playing a joke. It isn't right. A principal should be serious. He shouldn't be playing like one of the kids in his school." The poor man tried very hard to catch the balloon, but he couldn't do it. So there was nothing for him to do but put up with it. Outside the city hall, the balloon stopped. It waited for him in the street, and when the principal went back to school, the balloon was still behind him. The principal was only too glad to let Pedro out of his office and to be rid of Pedro and his silly balloon. So on the way back home, Pedro stopped to look at a picture in a sidewalk show. It showed a little girl with a hoop. Pedro thought how nice it would be to have a friend like that little girl. But at just that moment, he met a real little girl, looking just like the one in the picture. She was wearing a pretty white dress, and she held in her hand the string to a blue balloon. Pedro wanted to be sure the girl noticed that his balloon was a magic balloon. But his balloon would not be caught, and the little girl started to laugh.
Part 1 is over.